Welcome back to On Texas Football, a little Saturday recruiting update. I'm CJ Vogel, joined by Gerry Hamilton. This episode of On Texas Football is brought to you by Vaughn Lane. And Gerry, we're talking about how this Texas offensive class can get to where it needs to be by the end of the 2026 cycle. Obviously, we'll go position by position here. Texas already knocked it out of the park with Bell at the quarterback position. But Gerry, a lot left to go, if you will, in this 2026 class at running back, wide receiver, a lot still on the plate for all these offensive linemen and Kyle Flood. But let's start with running back. Let's go down position by position. Running back's an interesting one because obviously KJ Edwards is at the top of the board, and then it's all kind of a waiting game to see whether or not Texas will get that official visit or when that official visit will be for Derek Cooper.
Yeah, I think there's four guys in play right now. You mentioned KJ Edwards. He's the top of the board in state, and I think Texas is in a good position for him, especially considering the news that we broke earlier in the week that KJ Edwards just changes OV from June 6th to June 20th. So Texas gets the last shot. He's coming in with a lot of the committed kids in this class, including Bell, including Nicholas Robertson, offensive lineman, Max Wright, offensive lineman. So there's some things fall into place for Texas there, as he will also visit Alabama, LSU, and A&M prior to Texas. So while he got that Colorado visit out of the way, it's all SEC battle from here on out. And then you have Xavier Crowell. And CJ, Xavier Crowell is interesting because Texas, obviously, him and his mom really like Texas. But Alabama feels a lot of pressure to keep him home in this recruitment. That's just the reality. When he reclassed from 27 to 26, he became the guy in state at running back and the guy that the pressure was on for Alabama to beat out big bad Texas for. And then you also have Auburn in the mix and a couple others for Xavier Crowell ahead of a June 26 commitment. Then you have Derek Cooper, saw him a little over a week ago. I continue to hear he's going to officially visit Texas, but the date hadn't come out. He visited Auburn last weekend. He's got a number of visits coming up, and I think Texas wants they want the weekend visit. I'm not sure the family's going to back off the weekend visit of the schools that have been recruiting him for so long when Texas hasn't. And that's Georgia, where he's one-time commitment, and that's Miami. And one more. So it's like that's a tough spot. I think Texas right now, I lean to a midweek OV for him instead of a weekend OV for him. We'll see. And then there's Carson Baker out of Langston Hughes, Chad Scott's most recent offer, a guy that's really fast with size. And I think there's a chance that Texas is going to bring him in June. We'll see when that date is. So that's kind of pretty much where we're at with running back. CJ, I'm going to lead you right back into wide receiver, though, because that's next. And I want to get you started with Jalen Lott, one of the more interesting recruitments for Texas fans in this cycle, because he started out as a corner recruit and Terry Joseph was recruiting him. And now it's shifted to wide receiver with Chris Jackson leading the recruitment and Mark Orfeh still involved there in case he has a change of heart. But right now it's looking more Chris Jackson recruitment.
Yeah, it is more offensive centric. And I think that was made clear by Lott early in his recruitment is, hey, I want to catch passes. I want to score touchdowns. Wide receiver is kind of that path for me in terms of where I want to play my college football. And it makes sense, right? Early on, it was Oregon, it was Ohio State, it was LSU, all recruiting him as a wide receiver. Texas now sitting him in those wide receiver meetings. Chris Jackson made a stop up to Panther Creek to go see him in the spring as well. And his most recent trip to Texas was a sit-down meeting with Chris Jackson. Mark Orfeh, Dwayne Aquino also sat in as well, but Steve Sarkisian, all on the same vision of the offensive side of the ball. Right now, if I had to kind of pick a two-team race, a three-team race also, if you will, Texas would be in that mix. Oregon's in that conversation. And look, I'll throw a sneaky wild card of LSU. I know LSU's got some teams or some wide receivers already in the class, but I think there's some liking to the Baton Rouge atmosphere, community, that program as well. So right now, Jalen Lott, Texas, Oregon, we'll see which team comes out on top moving forward. I think July 4th, Gerry, might be a big decision-making weekend there, but I'll move it right back on over to you because I think that Texas and wide receivers, really interesting conversation moving forward. And I'll start with Caden Finley, another in-state DFW guy. What's the latest on him?
The two legacy recruits. You just talked about Jalen Lott, and now we're hitting on Caden Finley at Aledo. And I think Caden Finley's recruitment comes down to one simple thing right now. Does he want to blaze his own path and do something different than what his father did? If that's the case, you feel really good if you're Notre Dame headed into official visits. I think the OVs are going to be A&M, Notre Dame, and Texas. Or those are the three main schools. I just don't see Jermichael Finley's son going A&M. So let's say it's Notre Dame or Texas right now. That's what I think this could come down to. And now I think he had a great visit in April with his family, and I think that visit went really well. Chris Jackson's been through twice. In May, he made the in-home visits. It's again, this one's pretty simple. It really boils down to this. Caden Finley just want to go do his own thing, something different than his dad did, and blaze his own path. Some kids are like that. They're legacy kids. And then some kids say, you know what, let's go run this thing back at the same school. And we'll see where this one ends up. Now, Texas gets the last official visit. Again, a potential early July decision. CJ, we're going to be working a lot on July 4th, I think.
Yeah,
another receiver. You saw 2 weeks ago or last week in Destrehan, Louisiana, one of the more interesting recruitments, the LSU commit, which is pretty much down to LSU in Texas. Why don't you give everybody the latest on him?
Yeah, Jabari Mack. What's the latest here? I mean, you mentioned it, Texas and LSU, and he mentioned that the only two official visits locked in right now. Texas June 13th, LSU June 20th. So LSU will get the final say in this recruitment in terms of the official visits in the summer. But hey, he's listening to Texas. Chris Jackson made the trip down for that spring game against Edna Carr to watch him in person, in which Jabari Mack was really good, Jerry. I know that there's been some conversation where he might stand talent-wise with the rest of this wide receiver crop. I'm a big fan of Jabari Mack after seeing him in person for the second time. And right now, just listening to Texas, getting him back to campus is going to be big. But on top of that, you're going to need to get the family on campus. You're going to need to win over the parents and let them see why Texas should be the home for Jabari Mack in college. So that's the big key. Texas versus LSU, get the parents on board, and we'll start moving from there. But, Jerry, to popcorn it back to you, because I know that there's two other wide receivers we need to hit on real quick. I'll ask you real quick about Aaron Gregory, but I also want to hear a little bit about Chris Stewart, because, look, he's still in the class right now. Haven't talked a lot about him. What are the Texas's chances with Aaron Gregory, who's set to come in June 13th? But also, what have you heard anything about Chris Stewart and his standing in this class? Any visits coming up for him?
I'll start with Chris Stewart. Yeah, look, his brother being kind of growing into becoming a Power 4 recruit kind of throws a little mud in the water in this recruitment a little bit. Chris Jackson's been down to see him. He visited Texas in April, or it was early May. That was the first time he'd been on campus in the spring. Chris Stewart's scheduled to be in June 20th with the other Texas commitments, Dia Bell, Nicholas Robertson, Max Wright, Chris Stewart, all those guys on June 20th. So I think Texas they feel good, but it's still a battle, because what if he decides he wants to go to the same school as his brother does? I mean, Arizona State's in play. There's a few others in play there as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. With Aaron Gregory, he's one guy that I think the recruitment could go into the season on. He's a Texas A&M commit out of Douglasville, Georgia. I think one of the top 75 recruits in the country. He's scheduled to be at A&M June 6th, Texas June 13th. Does he even make the visit? Or does this go into the season? I think there's a chance this one could go into the season. I also think he could very easily go take a visit to Texas and it never gets out publicly. Because when you're committed to A&M, that's always one of the things you're not going to know, even in our business, about every kid that steps foot on campus. And this would be one scenario in this cycle for Texas that he could visit Texas and nobody really ever knows it. And that's what I would say.
Jerry,
and there's one. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you saw a big-time wide receiver from a few years ago that made it to Texas and nobody ever knew. And that's, of course, Jeremiah Smith. So, to your point, you never know who might step foot on campus, and quite frankly, it never released. But one more name out of Oklahoma, Mason James. Chris Jackson went by to see him on Monday of this past week. Texas involved there, Jerry. Is that a name that Texas fans need to keep on the forefront of their radars?
You know, he's going to be interesting. Raise your hand if you've ever seen somebody from Norman North sign with Texas. Nobody's hand is raised right now. So we'll have to see at the end of the day. Now, that doesn't mean he'd go to Oklahoma. it's not always about, hey, Oklahoma versus Texas. It's sometimes it's from there. It's about anywhere but Texas. So we'll have to see. I know times are a little different now. More people move into areas, move out of areas. But Washington's very much involved there. And Washington's got a little quiet momentum in recruiting right now. They're all snuggled away in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people aren't paying attention to Washington. But Washington's actually got a little something going right now on the recruiting front. So I think they're a factor. But Chris Jackson obviously was up to see Mason James during the evaluation period, and he's scheduled to be in town June 13th through 15th. Again, what could happen there? Could a kid from Norman North have a commitment ceremony and sign with Texas? It's never happened before, but we are in different times, CJ.
Yeah, we are. Real quick, we got tight end and offensive line remaining, Jerry. But before we get to that, a quick word about Vaughn Lane as we get into the meat of this offensive line and 2026 recruiting class.
Yeah, for sure. Vaughn Lane, best in the business. You tired of flying? Tired of driving? Well, now it's time to upgrade to Vaughn Lane, the smarter way to travel between major Texas cities. And for the out-of-state listeners, Vaughn Lane now connects Nashville to Memphis and to Atlanta. Let's face it, flying has a hassle, security lines, packed gates, delayed flights, all for a 50-minute trip. Not worth it. Driving isn't much better. Ever tried a same-day round trip between Dallas and Austin? That's hours of lost productivities, emails piling up, calls going unanswered, work left undone while you focus on the road. Why waste a day when you could stay connected and productive with Vaughn Lane? Vaughn Lane changes everything. It's luxury but regional bus travel, what some call a private jet on wheels. Sink in the plush leather seat with leg rests. Stay connected with complimentary Wi-Fi. Enjoy complimentary snacks and drinks on every trip, plus delicious meals on select departures. Need to freshen up and indulge in hot towel service. Want to relax? We got eye masks, pillows, and blankets to keep you cozy. Seems like a good work day in general. Maybe we'll do like 3 shows from there one day. The Vaughn Lane team takes care of every detail, so you can sit back, unwind, and enjoy the most comfortable travel experience on the road. See for yourself. Visit vaughnlane.com. That's vaughnlane.com and use promo code OTF25 for $20 off your first trip.
Good deal. Thank you, Jerry, and thank you to Vaughn Lane for sponsoring this Saturday edition of, we'll call it a recruiting breakdown because we're talking some recruiting. On to the tight ends. There's 3 right now with official visits, 1 for each weekend. I want to get your thoughts on that real quick, Jerry, but let's go over those 3. First, Mark Bowman out of Mater Dei in California. Of course, his father has ties to Louisville. The family almost moved to Austin Westlake when they were deciding when and where to put their kids in high school. The next weekend, June 13th, is Hezzy Kent out of Georgia. You just went down and saw him, kind of that jumbo tight end body. A lot of folks, kind of conversing, debating whether or not this is an offensive lineman long time. Look, we'll get your thoughts there. And then June 20th, Caden Prothrow, the consensus 5-star out of Bowden, Georgia. 3 really talented tight end prospects scheduled to come in, 1 each weekend. Jerry, tight end looks like it could be really fun for the Longhorns in 26.
Yeah, the question, let's start with Bowman and Prothrow because they're maybe the most athletic pass-catching tight ends in this class. And are we in a scenario where Texas and Georgia just want to split those 2 and both get 1? I mean, that feels like, and I don't want to discount the other teams because Prothrow's got a great visit list. Mark Bowman also visited Ole Miss. He's got Alabama. He's got Oregon. He's got USC around Texas and Georgia. But all roads currently point to Texas or Georgia for Mark Bowman, the 5-star tight end. And you mentioned it. Dad was born in Louisville, Texas. When they were living in Colorado and decided they were going to move when Mark was going into high school, they looked at Mater Dei, Westlake, and South Lake Carroll. So there's some ties to Texas. There's ties to the city of Austin. They've been there multiple times. So I kind of wonder if that's where these recruitments may head. Texas and Georgia may
gentleman's agreement.
Yeah, let's split these guys. The question with Mark Bowman, I think, really is going to come down to, look, when he was kind of coming up before he reclassed, people were, who are they comparing him to? Brock Bowers. There was the natural Brock Bowers comparisons. He's been to Georgia. Georgia's been on him. But now you kind of look at that and say, okay, is Texas offense and quarterback room, production at tight ends, is that actually a better landing spot? We're going to find out. Does Texas have more tight end depth than Georgia moving forward? Could that help Georgia? We'll find out. Hezzy Kent's really interesting to me, CJ, because when I was at Brunswick High a couple of weeks ago, I walked away from there thinking Texas might be the favorite. And I'm not saying Texas is going to get him, but my years doing this, I walked away and I immediately called Bobby Burton, and I said, I got a little Texas feel from that deal. And I'm not discounting Florida, and I'm not discounting Miami. He's also got Georgia Tech and FSU. But I think Texas is doing pretty well with Hezzy Kent. And, by the way, he's only considering schools that are recruiting him as tight end. The only people he's ever talked to at Texas about his recruitment are Jeff Banks and Steve Sarkisian. Now, that doesn't mean Kyle Flood isn't in there saying, hey, we're recruiting you as a tight end. But there's no talk of any other position by Texas. Okay. It's all about tight end. Inline tight end, things you could do in this offense with your size, what makes you different than any other guys we've recruited at tight end. That's the pitch Texas has given Hezzy Kent, and he's only interested in playing tight end. So those are the guys, and it's going to be interesting to see. Texas wants 2 tight ends. They want to either win out for Bowman and Prothro and Hezzy Kent, and that would give them 2 different types of tight ends. We'll see where it all ends. CJ, offensive line is going to be really intriguing. And I'm going to go to you because you saw Turntine and Ojo recently. Obviously, I've seen him before, years past and earlier in the season. But you have Nicholas Robertson, one of the top guards in the country, I believe, and Max Wright, one of the 4-star offensive tackle from Melissa in the fold. So that's 2. The number is going to go to 5 for sure. And obviously, the 2 names at the tip of everybody's tongue, and then I'll hit some of the out-of-state guys. But tell us about your stops with John Turntine, Felix Ojo, 2 guys Texas is doing well with. Maybe even Zayden Crimpin at Prosper, who Texas is quietly doing well with.
Yeah. We'll start with Turntine because I know that he's kind of been the name longest familiar with the Texas fan base here. Again, the big news over the last week or so is that he bumped Tennessee for Stanford in an official visit. What does that tell you? Well, you look at his official visitors, it's Stanford, it's Michigan, it's Texas A&M. It's all very high caliber, prestigious educational institutions with good football programs, right? Stanford, we'll include them in that conversation. But right now, I have to imagine it's a Texas A&M battle. I think Michigan's going to go in pretty heavily for one of these big-time offensive linemen. I don't know quite who that is, but we've seen them play big money factors in the NIL world before with Bryce Underwood. So I would imagine that they'd like to protect him at some point. But right now, moving forward, John Turntine, 6, 7, 8 visits, Jerry, to both Texas and Texas A&M, the familiarity with the coaching staff, with the programs, with the university, both of those teams separate each other from the pack. So Texas A&M, I think Texas feels pretty good. I think Texas has done a great job. And speaking with Turntine, I think he's got a little affinity to the Longhorns and what the Texas has been able to offer him beyond just football. On top of that, Felix Ojo, that's a little bit more wide open, more visits. He's already taken trips to Texas Tech, Ole Miss, Colorado. On top of that, he's still got Ohio State and Oklahoma in the mix for this one, as well as Texas and Michigan. Where does that go? I don't think Oklahoma is going to be a big factor in this one after the Fasusi deal last year. I mentioned Michigan wanting to be a big player for a big-time national offensive tackle. Could they make a run at Felix Ojo? I know that they stopped down in Mansfield several times this spring to see him, but Texas still recruiting him as, quote, that franchise player is what he told me it feels like from Steve Sarkisian and Kyle Flood. That's normally a little bit of an indication that someone's mentioned that to him behind the scenes. We'll see, of course, whether or not Texas falls through with that franchise pursuit, Jerry. But Texas certainly in the mix for both. I don't want to necessarily call them the clear leader, but certainly right there at the pole position for both. Of course, it's all about getting it over the finish line for both of those. But, Jerry, you talk about these out-of-state guys and how the rest of this class might fall. Should Texas land one or both of these guys, what remains in place for the Longhorns, especially now that you could consider an Aaron Thomas out in Arizona or Grayson McKee up in Pennsylvania, both of which coming in for officials?
Yeah, look, I think there's one guy out there that there's no doubt Texas leads for, and that's Samuel Roseborough out of Clearwater, who obviously his mom moved to Austin in January for work. He stayed at Clearwater to be with his teammates and the kids he's kind of grown up with. He moved from Greensboro, North Carolina, I think when he was 11, to Clearwater. So he's at that age, he's been there through middle school and high school with all his teammates and friends. But I think Texas is a clear favorite for Roseboro. Does that mean Texas is going to win out for him? I'm not saying that, but I do think Texas is a favorite for 3 or 4 of these guys right now. The whole deal is going to be, to me, as the dominoes start to fall, I think somebody may peel. Somebody may be like, you got 5 guys. I'm not going to be the 6th, right? Because there's I'm here to tell you, if Malachi Lee visited June 13th and raised his hand, Texas isn't saying no. That guy's a tremendous player. I mean, anytime Kyle Flood goes to Honolulu and Stacy Searles goes from Athens to Honolulu to see a kid, that guy's a tremendous player. He's just not out promoting himself on social media. He didn't even put together a junior year huddle, really. And he's out in Hawaii, so he's not on the camp circuit. So people don't really know how good he is. But if you follow where the college coaches are going, you don't just get on a plane from Athens to Honolulu for just a low 4-star offensive lineman. Yeah. You think this guy's one of the best players in the country. Same thing with Kyle Flood. So Malachi Lee is really talented. You have Sam Utu at Orange Lutheran. A lot of people think Washington could be the team to beat. I think he's excited about his visit to Texas. Then you mentioned the guy that most recent offer, Grayson McHugh, 6'7.5", 280. The question you mentioned, Aaron Thomas, question will be, do those guys really make the official visits, right? I mean, McHugh, Texas came in late. They're in the top 3. We broke that news, but he's going to visit Penn State and Notre Dame. And Penn State's been on him a long time, and Notre Dame tends to win a lot of those offensive line battles for those type of future NFL guys up there. But Texas is in on tremendous group of offensive linemen. And I have no doubt they're going to sign 5 really good linemen in this class. The question is, if there's 6 guys that want in, do they say no? I would say if it's a really good player, they won't say no. Then the other question with offensive line is, if a couple of more offensive tackles commit, does that cause one guy that may have been a Texas lean to look a different direction? We'll see. I think that's normally how it works out in recruiting. So we'll see where things head, but it's going to be 5 solid offensive linemen in this class. And CJ, in closing for me, I think Texas is going to have a tremendous offensive line class. I think they have a chance to have a great tight end class, depending on how things fall. I think wide receiver could play out into the season a little bit for maybe a final spot. And running back's going to come down to, I think they're in a good spot for Edwards. Do they knock out one of these out-of-state guys? And I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. But the one thing we know, CJ, it's going to be a tremendous class at the end of the day.
Yeah, that was going to be my last question for you, because it feels like Texas, whether it be in-state, whether it be out-of-state, we've talked about, where Texas is recruiting this year, but all in all, high-level talent is making its way to campus. And that's, of course, the overall objective. Get guys on campus, get them to official visits, get them in the class. But, Gerry, my final question for you is that offensive line group. And regardless of where Texas fills its 5 or 6, talk to me a little bit about this talent level on the offensive line in terms of the 10 or 11 that make it to campus. Is it the best that we've seen under Kyle Flood? Is it comparable to what Texas brought in 2022? How does this stack up with previous classes?
I think it's going to be comparable to 2022. Now, your 5 stars in that class were Kelvin Banks and DJ Campbell. Kelvin Banks went on to be a 5-star prospect. DJ Campbell, questionable if he was, really a 5. He was a very talented kid, but maybe hasn't played up to that level. Then you had guys that I thought were all 4-star guys. I mean, when you go through it, Neto was ranked in the top 100 in the country. Cam Williams, some people had him a 3-star, but I thought that was ludicrous. He was a top 150 guy in the country. Cole Hudson, Connor Robertson, Malik Ogbo. That was a really talented group of offensive linemen. It's not going to be 7 in this class, but I will say this. Whether you think Turntine's a 5-star, whether you think Ojo's a 5-star, whether you think Sam Rosebur's a top 100 kid in the country or not, Malachi Lee's top 100 kid in the country or not, just think about the guy. Think about what we're talking about here, and think about this. Sam Utu's probably top 150 kid in the country.
Yeah.
Then think about a kid like Grayson McHugh. This is where Texas programs at. Just offered him a week ago, locks in official visit, one of the 3 official visits. And is he underrated? If Duke, Penn State, and Texas are your 3, he's probably underrated nationally. Let's just go with that at 6'7.5", 280. So Texas is in on so many talented guys. I do think when the dust settles, the 5 or 6 guys in this class are going to be comparable to the 2022 class.
Good deal. You mentioned Grayson McHugh. Texas offered top 3. That's from Pennsylvania.
Yes.
I don't know when the last Texas recruit from Pennsylvania signed or even visited. So worth mentioning there, of course, the broader reach of Texas recruiting, the landscape certainly paying off. Texas winning, developing on the field, certainly paying off. And that will do it for today. Gerry, thank you very much. Von Lane, thank you very much for sponsoring this Saturday edition of Recruiting Breakdown as well. We'll be back tomorrow with a little bit of the same outlook and breakdown, but from the defensive side of the ball. So stay tuned for a little Sunday fun day action for Gerry and I. But for now, enjoy your Saturday and tune in to Texas softball this evening. Welcome.